Jan-Maurits Loecke from CRTKL is on a sustainability mission to educate the construction, architecture and design industry how to achieve net zero. Buildings are responsible for 40% of greenhouse gas emissions, so we can all expect a lot of what we're familiar doing to soon change. Jan is here to handhold us through the imminent process and to share his insight into how each of us can make changes in our businesses right now. Net zero, we are coming for you. Jan, welcome to the Designerati podcast. I am so excited. You've cycled here today, obviously, haven't you? Where have you come from?
It's northwest London, Wilson Green. It's around 3/4 of an hour, I would say, cycling trip. And
is that your mode of transport around London?
It is, and it's really, really enjoyable to do so. And it's wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, welcome. Yes. Now, as is our typical format, we have invited you to talk about sustainability, net zero, the climate. But we start with a bit of an icebreaker. So we've asked you to either bring an object or talk about something which people wouldn't typically associate with you.
Okay, I will do. First, I was thinking about an icebreaker. But talking about net zero, it doesn't go really together with ice breaking. You know, we want to prevent ice from breaking, right? We don't want the Arctic to melt. So okay,
smart.
Aside the joke, but I brought this a little object, which is a stone or a bit of rubble, right? It doesn't look a lot, I have to say, but it talks a lot about me.
Looks quite heavy to carry on a bike.
It's not. It's very hard, not like my head, but I would say when you turn it around, you will see on the other side a little bit of a blue sky, a little bit of painting, which gives you a little bit of hope. I collect a lot of these objects. I find a lot of sand, a lot of branches of trees, shells, wherever you come across. Why I brought these is they symbolize for me imagination of humans, of mankind, in a way, because this is a part of the Berlin Wall. I picked it up 2 weeks after it came down in 1989.
Wow.
And it's quite heavy. It's around 700 grams. I measured it I will come back to it later why. But it symbolizes for me that humans can imagine and create for the good as well as for the bad. Because here a wall was created, but also people imagined, freedom and a positive future by breaking it down again. And it carries a lot of meaning for me and myself. In a way, I would say, I think it's even more precious than precious stones or diamonds. Of course, you cannot wear it around your neck. But because this means also the end of
oppression
Cold War as well back then, right? So this is where I grew up. And this I wanted to share with you this morning.
I love that. Thank you for bringing that along. Let me. Can I touch it?
You can of course touch it.
Am I allowed?
And that tells a bit the story of how I grew up, and that plays a fundamental role how I think and how I behave and how I act and why I'm here on the sustainability bit is because in that era, 77 to 87, that decade, and you might remember that. It was an era of fear, of pollution, of Cold War, of anything you imagine, and it was quite depressing, I would say. We thought back then it was the end of the world. Right? We had the issue of the asbestos, of the ozone hole, and we had issues like Chernobyl blew up as well.
Yeah, I remember.
And we had the anti-nuclear power movement in Germany. But then a lot of grassroots campaigns came along. The founding of the Green Party and Greenpeace's German operation started back then, and other interesting grassroots movements came along. And after that decade, I think I felt a bit like a revelation or reconciliation happened in the world, because all those problems were kind of regional, right? I mean, it was like about the area, the forest next door, the river next door. And the following decade was also when the wall came down, and the Treaty of Maastricht, walls in general, borders came down, and a lot of, let's say, energy-saving measures were introduced to save the environment back then. For example, in 1991, the first ever passive house was erected in Germany, and bear in mind, it was 30 years ago. We still talk about it. And also what happened was The first PVs were installed, the first wind energy emerged, and also on a policy level. And this is quite important to see, because it's like a cycle, right? I mean, first we had the threat, then grassroots movements came along. They pushed then the lawmakers to introduce policies or incentives, and the industry followed. And we have been there before, many times before as well. And now, in the year 2020, 2022, we are here again. Though this time is a global scale, though.
What a heartfelt and moving way. And thank you for being vulnerable to start the podcast. This is absolutely beautiful. And what I can sense with you is one of your intrinsic values is freedom. Freedom. Yeah, freedom.
Freedom and freedom to think, because design gives you this freedom, right? Everything is, when I see a stone or something, this has potentials to rebuild the future, to build a more sustainable future.
Yeah.
And I think this is the thinking, this is the thought process we all go through in architecture terms or in the built environment.
Transformation, change, that doesn't frighten you?
Yes.
That doesn't frighten you?
Not really, in a way.
The unknown?
The unknown is an excitement, it's an exploration. I'm not frightened by it because, you see, we need to think positive. We have achieved a lot of things already. Because
before we go into the details of, I kind of want this to be almost like, without demeaning the importance of this subject, almost like a bluffer's guide, in sustainability. Because for me, this is such a fascinating subject, and there's so much noise. There's so much, I read the McKinsey report on sustainability. It's so complicated. And what I want to understand from you, because, I've spoken to you already before this, you're a smart guy and you have this inner ability to simplify the very complicated, and I admire that about you. So for many people, this whole kind of the new mandates, the new regulations, the new systems and processes are very frightening. What would you say to that? What would you comment to that?
I mean, this is where it comes through when I talk about the company later on as well, is we all are aware of the different summits which happened, the Earth Summit in Rio, then we had COP 21, I think it was, the Paris Agreement, and the COP 26. First, to say the good things. We all came together. The countries came together. They agreed there is something happening and something needs to be done to save the planet. They agreed that it's man-made. They agreed that the greenhouse gases need to be reduced. And they agreed to maintain the 1.5 degrees as maximum warming potential in the world. So what I do sometimes is there's a web application or website for MCC in Berlin, and it is called the Carbon Clock. So the Carbon Clock gives you, and it's literally a clock you look at with the decreasing time we have left, and it looks at the budget of carbon we have left until we reach that point of 1.5 degrees, which scientists say is the point of no return. And I look at that like twice or 3 times a week, maybe, or I share it with colleagues or others, not as a warning, but just a reminder that we have very little time left in that sense. It says now we are at 7 years or something, 7 or 6 years.
Very little time for what?
Very little time to have emitted too much carbon. Mm-hmm. So the global warming reaches 1.5 degrees. Some scientists might say it should be between 1.5 or 2 degrees. So after that, there will be most probably a tipping point where then different weather systems emerge, or even the ice caps melt, and more water emerges. Now, if you look at that sense, so that's where we are at the moment. So the clock is ticking and we have to act now. So the objective, in my opinion, is to stop that clock ticking. And we also need to talk not only about carbon, and we talk about it a bit later in detail, but also about water preservation, which is a huge factor.
Huge, yeah.
And but also the other greenhouse gases. And as I mentioned earlier, for example, when we talked about the ozone hole, a few years later, the aerosols and the CFCs were banned. And what happened is the ozone holes, the majority of it, closed again. The gap closed again. So we can act and we can revert the damage we have done.
So what I'm hearing from you is actually what you were expressing when you were talking about the Berlin Wall. We've actually come a full circle. We have actually experienced global issues before that we've actually dealt with, e.g. the ozone.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of a global issue, I would say. Now, we of course, we are facing a tremendous problem now, which was probably much worse than it was before.
Yeah.
But I think we shall be optimistic that we have the tools and the skills and the will to do so.
Well, we will after this podcast. I'm feeling it. So let's just recap. So the problem with climate change is there's too much CO2 in the atmosphere, and the solution is to deploy CO2 removal techniques, which is what I want to talk to you about. And that is believed that, you know, by the middle of the century, we're going to work to halt global warming, which is this net zero. First of all, why are you here? Tell me about you. You've got a key role at CRTKL in sustainability, empowering and inspiring people. Tell me about your role.
Thank you. I hope I can inspire and I hope I can empower people. The following is because of my background, as I explained earlier. My interest is, of course, to educate and engage in conversations around my immediate neighborhood as well, with colleagues. And I am the, as I call it, Sustainability Fellow for the London office and Manchester office. And CRTKL, which is a global firm with around 1,300 architects and offices in many continents, is greatly important because just purely by having around 2,000 live projects per day, in a way that we work on them, and just look at the square footage of area, and the projects are very large, which are being poured into the ground or emerging. We have a voice and we have a responsibility as well. So what then the firm is doing, like we introduced several sustainability fellows throughout the world, and they build teams around themselves. They call them SIM advocates as well. They are doing energy modeling and tracking carbon footprint. So in a way, it's very participative, and we believe that by doing so, we not only raise awareness, but we might find the right vocabulary amongst ourselves first, within and internally, but also externally when we talk to clients. Because at the end of the day, we need to have the right partners to make that happen.
But why are you the sustainability expert? Because I sense with you that you've integrated, the values of sustainability. I spoke to you before this podcast. This isn't because you can talk about this subject and you're very articulate. This is something that you are inertly passionate about. Tell me about that. Why do you care about sustainability? I feel like it's in your blood.
I think, as I mentioned earlier, we need to find the right language. It's not about numbers only, abstract numbers. I think it's about, morality or responsibility we all have, all of us.
How are you taking responsibility? I know you cycle.
So on a small level, on a tiny level, of course, I do cycle. I walk around. I listen. I train myself, and if it comes to architectural work, of course, look at examples. Look at how things can be done, or innovation-based thinking.
Anything you're doing at home that people listening to this can take away?
So at home is, okay, I have 2 kids, I talk to them, of course, and I try to educate them in a responsible way. What I do is, there comes a time we have certain climate marches, I go there and express my voice, I come with a banner and say this has to stop, this needs to go, because I think we all need to in a way, voice our anger or awareness, and make people aware of it.
Tell me a little bit about home. When you were talking about your kids, you share with your kids about the benefits of sustainability, and what are you implementing at home?
So we have to say, at home as such, we're quite international background. We keep the heating very, very low, the windows open. This is traditionally always what we do. because I think not only that we get less colds and less sick, but I think it keeps us quite activated as well. We don't think we need to overheat every single room in our houses. This is over the top. I think by reducing on a personal level the energy use, we can already achieve quite a lot.
Very good. So, for example, put a jumper on instead of putting the heating on.
Exactly, and move yourself around. And then, we unfortunately we drive a car. It's a hybrid car, so it's kind of a hybrid in between, of course, as we all know, in being combustible and electric car. That helps a lot. I try to reduce myself on a personal level as well as in the office air travel, because the industry a few years back came with a lot of travel. A lot. We traveled immediately to client meetings around the world.
But how great is Zoom and, the Skype and the technology we have nowadays? So we don't actually have to have the physical meetings. We can have the via screen
that
meetings.
So I'm very glad that I'm here physically with you, because I think Zoom wouldn't necessarily work to pass on stuff to you. But I think these are the little moves. And in a way, I also don't try to create or alarm the kids as such. I think they need to be positive. It's very important to be optimistic. I think.
What about little things like recycling clothes, sharing clothes when you outgrow the clothes, or the recycling of the food waste? Do you have?
Okay, all these it should be standard for everyone, of course.
Very
but,
good.
You have a local charity shop. You try to break that eternal cycle of new clothing, new toys. And this is, if you have kids, in London is fantastic. You pass on clothing, you pass on toys as well. So on a personal level, it's quite interesting what actually the day-to-day life can bring you in terms of sustainability, I have to say.
Very good, lovely. Okay, let's have a couple of definitions, shall we?
Yes, please.
Sustainability and net zero.
Yeah.
You happy to give definitions?
Of course. We are, and I have to say, net zero is something it's measured sometimes. Is it the AUI? I don't want to make it too complicated. It's the energy usage intensity. It's basically the energy, or it's the carbon emission. It relates, though. Everything relates. But we, for example, as a company, we signed up to a system is called 2030 Challenge, where we commit to, as an operation, as a company, to be carbon neutral, and the projects to be carbon neutral by 2030, 100% reduction, as the comparison to a baseline model from 2003, which means how did our projects improve in comparison to a building which was built in the year 2003. We then, but this only talks about operation. The operational carbon is what, let's say, the mechanics, the use of the day-to-day use, but the usage of the energy. When it comes to the embodied carbon, this is the
operational.
Carbon, yes, but the embodied carbon is the critical one.
Embodied. What's the other one? So there's embodied carbon and operational.
There's operational, which is the operation as such, and then there's the embodied carbon, which is what every single material actually carries with it.
So there's two types of carbon.
Yes.
Okay.
And I want to, as an example, this block of concrete, as I mentioned earlier, is 700 grams. So we know that concrete the making of concrete emits around 410 kilograms per cubic meter. Mm-hmm. So you could measure immediately and can look at it and say, well, the making of this little crumb was around 150, 140 grams of carbon. This one, yeah? So if you see the amount of concrete around the world, of course, you can see what the impact might be. We know from our cars that driving a mile is around 150, 140 grams as well. So you start looking at materials and you start looking, so what is the carbon footprint, as we call it, of this cup, of this glass, of this building, of this carpet, of this, of anything you use. And we try to offset, first we try to reduce it by choosing different materials. And if we can't do so, we try to offset it by, let's say, renewable energy, who then offsets it on the side, or by recycling it later, or by reusing it.
Mm-hmm. I understand. So this excess CO2 that the construction,
Yes.
the design, we're specifically talking about construction design, you know, the architect world are using, creating, manufacturing. The idea is to reduce the amount of CO2 that we emit.
Yeah.
What is the effect of the CO2 that's being emitted currently? If we did nothing, what is the effect? What is going to happen? You were talking about the icebergs originally.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned in your intro that 40% of all carbon emissions worldwide is caused by the build industry, by the construction industry. And if you add, let's say infrastructure and engineering, it hits around 50%. This is quite significant, right? So the carbon relates directly to it's a greenhouse gas, and that helps, or that leads to the climate to overheat, and we don't want that to happen, because if the climate overheats, you know, the weather system changes, the El Nino as we all know it, the ice caps might melt, we have more water, flooding emerges, island countries, they're on low sea level, they might be flooded. As we all know, that might also cause more thunderstorms and more storms, and other parts of the world might be drier or have bushfires and all this kind of. So I just remember 2 years ago, even my little world of Germany, although I'm here, but there was flash flooding in the area of the Ahr, Mosel. We all heard about it with a lot of fatalities, and we were surprised. Everyone was surprised that happening. But because it happened in Germany, you know, we are lucky. We're living in an area in the zone of the world where we were not really affected yet. So there's a little bit of lack of urgency. But if you look at other continents, Australia, or currently in India, heat waves and stuff, unfortunately these people are very unfortunate and are more affected. In fact, there was a study saying that 85% of world population has experienced consequences of climate change or climate warming. 85% is a huge number. So I think we really need, as I mentioned earlier, we need to stop that with all we can. And we need to help as well everyone to mitigate those consequences.
Because, of course, you did mention that TKL has the internal mandate that you're going to be carbon neutral by 2030.
Yes.
But that's not mandatory, is it, for the entire industry? Is that self-imposed?
This is, of course, self-imposed because you commit to something, you join a scheme. In fact, we are not trying to be carbon neutral by 2030. We try to do it 1 year ahead in 2029, to be then carbon positive in 2030. So when we say positive, means you actually give something back to the climate, to the planet. So by doing so, as you probably mentioned earlier, we also committed to run a carbon neutral operation. And how do we do that? Well, first acknowledging it, we are tracking it. We then, once we tracked it, we know where it is, where the problem is. We try to reduce it by, less data on the cloud, by less flights, by less physical movement, and many of these things. But also then to offset the remainder as well. Can be by planting trees or other schemes available to a lot of people. So we achieved the neutrality of operation 2 years ago, and now we're working really hard to reach the 100% by 2029. It will be a hard one because the easy savings we have already made in the projects, but now we really need to go into the gritty ones and say, well, what happened here, what happened there?
What are the easy ones?
Well, let's say it's a clear understanding of everyone's of a context. Yeah, I mean, it's like the orientation of a building, for example. Yeah, the size of windows. But when we now optimize energy performance, as we call it, we we need to model every single project we are doing, because we can only measure, or we can only reduce what we have measured, and we can only measure what we have modeled. So model is you create an energy model of each single project. And this is the process we're going through at the moment of training everyone and doing so. And I think it's a very successful story in a way, because that means, let's say in simple terms, when you have a building and you have a skylight, or you have the window to the east, west, north, this energy model can tell you how much light enters the building. This energy model can tell you what shading devices you might need that you don't experience the glare, or where you actually add some PVs, photovoltaics. Or let's say natural ventilation is also a big topic. Yeah, we don't want to pump air conditioning throughout everywhere. But the main issues are, of course, cooling and warming of things. And we also learned in the last years that all the appliances in the buildings, they create heat, enormous amount of heat. The TV sets, the computer sets, the laptops, whatever we do creates heat. Now we need to invest a lot of energy to cool that down. And all these, of course, relates to where we get the energy from. But all is interconnected.
And of course, this relates to the new buzzword, which is the triple bottom line, because no longer is your company just responsible for, financial. Yeah. You're now responsible for the social and the environmental impact. Yeah, no, it's fascinating. What's the tough stuff? What is next? You've done the easy stuff.
Well, we are not really yet there. And I have to say, it is a fantastic move that we wrote as a company on the banner. On our banners, the three buzzwords is the people, the planet, and the positive design. You could also say people, planet equals positive design. So people we know, because it all relates that we need to foster communities, we need to engage people, we need to create still, of course, as well, apart from the sustainability, we need to encourage, let's say, social responsible design. We need to create a human experience and stories and storytelling, of course. And we need to care for well-being of people and happiness in design. The planet we all know is the sustainability effect. But we don't want to be just sustainable. We almost want to be, it's a change of paradigm. We need to be regenerative. Sustainable just is a status quo, right? It's a balance. But so much damage has been done already. We need to be, as I mentioned earlier, we need to be the positive things. So actually taking, or for example, in simple terms, creating more energy, harvesting more energy through wind and solar panels, which we then feed back into, for example, the system or the grid. We can also start off thinking of strategies, but this is innovative thinking, of course, of cleaning the air around us. Right? Maybe we can collect particles if you're next to a busy road, M25. Right? We can start creating systems where we create the water, which is already polluted. So at the end of the day, it becomes a system where we can help the world to regenerate itself. Mm-hmm. And if you look at that, what happened? I just want to say what happened, for example, the fashion industry. That happened a little bit like this. Everything becomes very sustainable, but also social sustainable. Where is it coming from? Who has made it? What is transportation? What is the material? Does it make harm? So we are in a very interesting position as architects to say, well, previously we were confronted with a singular problem and we came up with a singular solution. Very exciting stuff we did. But we believe 5 years, 6 years or 10 years ago in our profession, we had unlimited resources, unlimited nature, unlimited space. And now it has changed. We understand we are part of nature. We understand there is no unlimited resources. It doesn't exist. So now we start looking into buildings in a different way. We look at the life cycle of a building. Yeah, as I explained with my little concrete block, it went through different stages, when it was erected, when it was demolished. So in a building is the same thing. So we look at what happened actually the time before the building gets even built. Where do the materials come from? Do they need to be transported a long way? Who made these things? Is child labor involved? Slavery involved? We don't want all this anymore. And then during the life cycle of a project, of course, we think about how it's been operated, of course, but also once it's the end of its lifetime, what happened to all this? Is it being reused? Can we recycle things? Maybe it stays there or somebody else moves in. So we need to design, as designers, in my opinion, flexible spaces that can be adapted. Because then, the turnover of buildings, demolition will also slow down.
Can you give an example at CRTKL where you've done a project that you're proud of that embodies those values and those processes you've described?
Yes, happy to do so. There are a few of them around in the European context. One is we looked at a variety of projects in Madrid in the European context. And there are two, we call them retrofit, right? They're existing buildings, maybe from the 60s or from the 80s, and they're considered sometimes they're now empty. Maybe they don't comply anymore with the requirements of tenants or from the energy code wise. And then we get invited and say, okay, how can we do this building? And how, as we see it as a kind of a toxic building, we always call it, how can we make it a healthy building? And one is next to the Madrid stadium. It's called Torre Europa, one of the most iconic towers in Madrid. And here we looked into the social component by actually creating a kind of an urban plaza outside or within the lobby.
What does urban plaza mean?
That means gathering space, so a place for the community, not only for the tenants but also for the people who are coming around. So you create a kind of diverse space, a space of acceptance, where people can gather and stay. And this is cooled down by an enormous canopy. But also we looked into upgrading, of course, the heating, the air conditioning, and make it more sustainable, right? Lower energy appliances. Opposite the street is in Via Castellana. Via Castellana is a very, very lovely building. So when you go to the airport, it's quite iconic. But it was run down as well. And what we tried to do is to implement to increase the offer, make it from a single use into a mixed use, because mixed use means it's occupied at different times of a day. It's not empty half of a day, but also we create actually with that building, we create energy, meaning there's a lot of solar panels on the roof, but also the shading devices along the facade. It's quite a large building. It's like I think 4 or 5 stories tall. So not a tower, creates energy. And it's all oriented, thanks to energy modeling and all the tools we have on hand, offers the ideal orientation and angle of PVs towards the sun. So here, the aim is under construction as we speak. The aim is to create an energy neutral building. One, though, which I am personally very proud of, is we work on a single-story office building on various sites in Europe, and we implement various innovative ideas with engineers as well. The construction hasn't started yet, but we explored the way of, they call it kit of parts. It's like a Lego system where we can later on rejig maybe the program, so it can be reused on other sites and shipped. It's a bit like the flat pack system of IKEA, as we know. On the other hand, also each of the elements.
How can it be reused?
Well, you could, for example, it can be reused on other sites that the client might have. It also can expand or detract. You can take things off. It's a bit like the idea of the International Space Station, right? It can be added or can be actually retracted, so you never have an empty space. And you can also extend. You don't need a new building once you experience growth in your company.
Yeah.
But each of the elements in an ideal world, when you talk to we talk about circularity as well, might have actually a little label where you can actually later on follow up where those elements are being later on. I mean, the beam or the wall segment or the door is being reused later on somewhere else in a recycling strategy. Now here we chose very early on and experimented with mass timber construction instead of materials which are evil, as we call them. One is, and you mentioned it earlier, is the concrete instead of concrete, and
You're not
steel.
messing around with your words, are you? Toxic, evil.
No, it's true, because we try to avoid as much as we can concrete and steel, because their process of making them requires a lot of energy.
Yeah.
and the cement, for example, as well. And
it's one of the biggest emitters of CO2, the production of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And also, of course, because, like say, concrete slab cannot be reused at the end of the day. It can be broken down and end up being a landfill. So we experimented that, and it was quite interesting process because the client is of course, as everyone else, very cost-driven. And midway through, he said, "No, I want you guys to develop at the same time the same project in steel, and see what the outcome is. See what is the cost implication." Because I didn't trust the timber. You might need to meet new energy codes, a lot of research involved, certification. We work very hard, and at the end of the day, and this is very important for everyone, to understand that sustainable buildings don't need to be more expensive. We achieved it in the very same budget to the penny. So the timber building,
mocking up the pre-process.
Yeah, I mean it's like the timber as such, and the steel. Of course, prices vary, and materials, as we know, went up anyway in general with the shortage of materials and global scale. But in this case, and we can always say now, and that's why I'm very proud of that, is Mr. and Mrs. Client or cities, bioclimatic architecture doesn't need to cost necessarily more.
Love that. That's wonderful.
And plus, even if it was costing a little bit more, whatever you save now, we always say, when you save money now, you will pay back in the next 50 years. Because by doing so, we're always hoping, and there's proof, that heating and cooling will come down during the process of 50 years. There's a lot of money as well.
And as I was doing my research, I was learning that the value of these buildings that are being created in these new sustainable ways are actually, they're increasing in value. They're becoming more valuable. People are actually selecting a sustainable building as a first option. Fascinating.
And it comes to add to that one is, the buzzword is, of course, impact investment. We talked about a lot of institutional investors and developers because we talk about large buildings rather than small ones. And even in the investment world, the investors, they are very, very conscious to build a portfolio of a sustainable portfolio, because that's what everyone wants to see. So we go at the moment hand in hand. Let's say the manufacturing industry, the materials, they're moving on, the investments moving in the green direction. So I think we have achieved a lot over the years, together, of course, with the policies of the COP21, 26. And we might be, you hear a lot of noise always, like particularly in Glasgow last year, where everyone seems to be very disappointed. But anyway, there are good decisions made. It was declared that we're living at the end of an era of coal. I would have loved personally, of course, to add gas and oil to it, but it wasn't. But that's my opinion. But also other benchmarks were achieved. The signatories, they agreed, for example, to reduce methane gas by 30%, which is one of the greenhouse gases. It was agreed to support, of course, electric vehicles and green energy. So steps by steps. But we are not even nowhere near. So that's why we all have to pull it off together to work together and go in the right direction. So just for the real estate, because we talked about the real estate industry, it's very important because we always ask ourselves, where do we go from here? And the only way it's about, as we think, is collaboration with other partners and all the partners. It's not one can do one thing, and of course they're competitors, but we all have to work together. On the other hand, we also need to do a lot of research and training and awareness, but we also need to allow the let's say the lawmakers to introduce policies and incentives as well, because these are, as shown previously, they can change things around.
What's a great resource for a company that's looking to educate themselves around sustainability and carbon reduction?
Because you asked that, and at CTKL we have certain research programs, internal programs.
Are these available for others, or just
these ones are not available? These are just let's say internally
Internal.
to first understand what is research. How do we research? We have a scheme to invite everyone who comes, also from uni, doesn't matter the level or juniority, to submit ideas for so-called micro grants. It could be, for example, a calculation of certain carbon footprint of materials or how we move forward. But important is we have one source which is available to everyone. It's the open source. It's called Climate Scout. I invite everyone to look into it. This is an app where
Climate Scout,
and it had, I don't know how many, 14,000 viewers in the first year when it was launched. There's certainly a need for that, and we're quite proud of that, because that shows you in very simplistic ways to design your building and what needs to be done. There's another thing in which was launched, but again this is internally. It's called a scorecard. So we were honest about our let's say goals, the people, the planet, and the positive design. So that scorecard assesses every single project in the company, what that means for the planet, for the people, and for the positive design. Not always with the outcome you wish for, but that's the point, right? We need to understand where we are and how we can improve.
Okay, and what happens? What happens if you get a bad score?
Well, then you learn, hopefully. You need to investigate, and the next project will be better. Or if it's a live project, where you need to introduce measures to make it.
I'm imagining that they put you in a room and turn the heating and the lights off. You will be punished.
No, but this is the idea, right? That we all work together and understand.
Absolutely.
This is not about winning or losing. It's about, being responsible.
What's the general flavour in the industry? I know you guys at CRTKL, you're major players and you're investing heavily in sustainability. How are your competitors operating alongside you? Are you collaborating?
In fact, for example, particularly with consultants or engineers, yes, we're collaborating. And there are brilliant competitors out there, of course, because everyone comes across similar problems. And we all face, of course, the same problem, that there's certain reluctance sometimes. Certain individuals, could be some clients, could be some policymakers, colleagues, or industry-wide. And then we try, of course, others as well, to work together to create acceptance for all those issues. What
is the reluctance from clients?
It's always trying to, not from all of them. I mean, they're all different, of course.
Of course.
But it comes down, of course, what I mentioned earlier is financials, of course. So we try to find the language everyone understands, because there are some key words everyone really understands. Yeah, I mean, if you would say my health, the future of my children, or my money, if you address those points, then people might turn around and say, oh, well, that's true. You could add my legacy, because some projects are legacy projects, of course. And so we try, on one hand, to make it as sustainable as possible. To add value, this is very important. To add to the legacy, but to make it a project which heals wounds in cities, or heals sites in cities, to connect communities. Now, that's very important.
I love your word, restorative. That's an exciting word, because for me it's building on something. It's not taking away anything. It's healing, like you that's your word. It's adding value. Tell me more about Climate Scout, because this is available for, it's a download on the App Store, and this is available for anybody to use.
Yes, absolutely.
Why would they use it?
So the idea is, very quickly, our understanding now is, as we look at buildings in a different way. It's important to see the location where your building is, because it relates directly to the climate. So all the energy modeling, but also the Climate Scout, which is not a modeling tool but an understanding, tells you about the location, so the climate impact. Is it a space which is overheated in summer and such, is, so you correct a certain location. Now, on the back of that, it's very similar to what we do day-to-day business, but in a simplistic way. So the choice of materials, for example. Which are the materials, which are the sinners in the world?
Another great word, sinners.
And what are the simple ways of shading, for example? Right? It could be, we call them eyebrows, could be jalousies, could be maybe a folded facade. So it gives an idea. It's more like a toolbox for everyone to understand what it is. It doesn't go too much into detail, of course, because you don't want anybody to be scared of, but it's to create awareness, understanding of the topic and the vocabulary. And it's something we're very proud of, and I invite everyone to look into that.
And that's called Climate Scout.
Absolutely, yes. What
are some of the things that the construction industry can address immediately? For example, let's talk about cement. What's a solution to cement, using cement?
There are, very capable companies out there. They invest, of course, first as a research level, maybe on university level, but some already offering a low carbon concrete. Now that has to do sometimes with the aggregate they're using, or it has to do with the heat input. Maybe the heat they're using or the energy using is already green itself. The same for steel, for example, and or for glass, for example. Some glass manufacturers, they're experimenting, of course, with carbon-free glass. It's a conglomerate, conglomerate of recycled glass. They're all out there. Nobody is asleep, because we all understand the urgency of this. So when you talk about New York so many times, I personally would say, wow, great, we have more of those New Yorks we all love. But from urban planning point, and RTKL has a huge urban planning legacy as well, carries in their back. It is very important to look at it carefully as well, how cities are set up. As we talked, there's a buzzword about the 15-minute city, for example. 15-minute city, this came out across during the lockdown particularly, is something where you can, or the aim is to reduce transportation. So you offer, for example, mixed-use projects or mixed-use uses in, let's say, offices, residential, hospitality, entertainment, in a way which you can reach by foot or by bike. Now, this might come also again with some other unwanted consequences, that there's maybe the danger of segregation within a city environment. But you see there are some concepts around it. If you look at cities like Paris or even Barcelona, where their mayors or mayoresses introduce schemes of pedestrianizing vast areas. I think in Amsterdam, they try to cut public parking by, 16,000 car parks, just to encourage people, of course, to use other means of transport. For the biodiversity, nature is being brought back into cities. It's very important. And so if we do another, 20 or 30 New Yorks, we have to be very mindful of what we do and how we build things.
And a final question is, what about the decarbonisation of kind of legacy areas, like, for example, Venice? Yeah. Where the architecture is already existing. If there's any practices or construction companies that are looking at kind of regenerating legacy projects like that, are there any quick techniques or methods that are being used already to decarbonise legacy areas?
In general terms, you would say an existing building is quite good, because you don't introduce new carbon for new slabs, for example, or new cladding. Right? This is quite good, because usually when you new build creates a lot of carbon. So, one way forward-looking thinking is first look at the existing stock, see what you can do with that, and to reuse it. If so, do you really need to newly build? There are requirements. We cannot just stop construction, right, from one to another go. Then try to offset, of course, it by means like renewable energy, for example. Now, important is what we did. For example, I mentioned the project in Madrid, in Castellana. We looked at the old facade of that building, for example. It was some sort of a granite. But of course, the cladding needed to be removed in order to meet the new energy requirements, right, the insulation behind. And we were thinking, wow, what a fantastic thing that might be. So to shred all those panels and use those as a new aggregate for the new concrete we are using. So to overcome the use of cement. The industry already offered it, this system or this process, but unfortunately we had to move away from it, because the industry would have done it was based in a different country. And then again, the transportation would have had a very negative impact on the carbon calculation. But you see, ways of thinking are there, and every day when you wake up and you go and find a new project, you think, what a fantastic day that might be. at the end of the day, you have a great innovative idea and you can pursue that. For example, in the office building, the timber building I mentioned earlier, to avoid an excess of mechanical ventilation, we use the floor. The floor is hollow to blow air literally in. We call it a low velocity ventilation, to blow air in, and it comes out from nozzles in the floor, and it's a very gentle way of ventilating a space. And you see, there are ways out there, and I think everyone is invited on that journey to explore new ways.
I have loved chatting with you. Thank you so much. Thank you for flying the green flag. I feel like, it's now time. The industry is becoming healthy, and it's not a frightening place. It's an exciting place. There's lots of support around. Starting with your your app.
Climate Scout, it's called.
Yeah, there's lots of resources around, starting with Climate Scout, your app,
Yes.
and it's an exciting time to be alive. Thank you for coming today.
And thank you, Melissa, very much. And I also would say, just as a closing word, that we need to address also all these issues with the young generations, the one they're coming. Because as we all know, and I remember the speech Obama gave in the COP26, he said to young people, guys, stay angry, stay alert. I know you're frustrated, because it's a slow process. But what we need is that everyone who was maybe in sixth form now or studying architecture to continue the dream, come join us on the journey to rebuild the world and make it a better place.
What a lovely closing statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melissa.
If you have enjoyed today's podcast as much as I have, do like and subscribe. It means the world. I'm going to be here every Monday with more exciting guests on the Designerati podcast. I'll see you then.